Back on Inside Tennessee this morning with House Speaker Cameron Sexton and our panelists, Ramsey Cohen and Susan Richardson-Williams. Mr. Speaker, you mentioned that Tennessee is constitutionally obligated to pass a balanced budget. That makes it different from what we see in Washington. Another big difference that I think many of our viewers would appreciate is that when a bill is proposed in the Tennessee legislature, you don't see a lot of other things attached to it, riders and other issues that don't have to do with that specific issue. Can you explain that for our viewers? Because it's very different from the way the federal government operates.
Yeah, I think a lot of us just wish the federal government would actually pass a budget first and foremost. I think they've been working on continuing resolutions now for over a decade. So, I think that's very different. But even 10 years ago, before Republicans came, Tennessee wasn't really passing a balanced budget. They were playing budget gimmicks. And I think that's what you've seen change in the last 10 years when you've changed administration and parties who are in control. So I think there's a big difference even in Tennessee in the last decade. In our bills, we don't allow it to have multiple subjects, meaning it's only due to the caption that it's for. So you can't load up multiple things on a single bill and try to run health care with appropriation with criminal justice reform. That's not allowed inside the state of Tennessee. And that's why in Washington you see all this foreign aid mixed with appropriation, mixed with education money, mixed with this, and everybody's voting on one bill. And that's how they try to get things passed instead of just doing it singly. So we're much different, as you say, than Washington and maybe some other states.
Susan?
Yeah. Cameron, you mentioned criminal justice reform as being one of the things that you see coming up in this session. Talk about that. Tell us exactly what the problem is and how are we going to solve it?
Well, so that's number one on the governor's priority. And so we're working with him. We worked with him last year. Unfortunately, we had the truncated session, and so not everything made it. So he's bringing that back, we believe. He's been working on it with his task force over the period. And so, there's some things to where maybe they're wanting to move people more towards a probational, maybe more of this and not so much in jail, which, we'll see what parameters they put forth in that. But I also think there's also a point where you can't go too soft. You need to have truth in sentencing for violent crimes and other victim crimes. So, we're still in conversations. We both understand where we want to go, and hopefully we can satisfy both sides.
Ramsey?
I know that's
Speaker, I'm really encouraged to hear that. And I think criminal justice reform is a area where you can probably find some broad bipartisan support. Of course, you don't really need that in the House with the supermajority that your party currently holds. But I'm curious if there are any ideas or any specific people in the House on the other side of the aisle that you think could be critical in helping you improve criminal justice and bring good reform to our state.
I mean, there is. We're always willing to reach across party aisle and work together where we can in Tennessee. I'm not going to get into the makeup of the committees or go that way. But what I will say is we work well with almost all the members of the Democrat caucus. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everything. There's things we just don't agree on, but we have to work through those and maybe next time work on something else. So I think it is not a political party type of thing. I think it's more of which direction do we want to go and how much. So I'm hopeful that we can pass something and it'd be bipartisan, kind of like the bills we had last special session for COVID business and the other things.
As we talked about, Mr. Speaker, you've been in that role since the summer of 2019. Do you see the Republican Party in this state as more unified now than then, or the reverse?
That's a good question. During the campaign, we did the bus tour. We traveled all across the state. I think the Republican Party in Tennessee is unified. I think the Democrat Party in Tennessee is unified. I think the difference in Tennessee is we're still able to work with another to benefit Tennessee as a whole. And so when things get to the House floor, 90% of them are bipartisan and we all vote for it and we pass on. There's a few people who may vote against certain stuff. But for the most part, everything that we do here, a lot of it is bipartisan. We've been able to stay away from the partisan politics for the most part, except for some pieces of legislation that everybody can guess what that might be partisan-wise. But I think the Republican Party as a whole came out in November very strong inside the state of Tennessee.
Go ahead,
Speaker,
Ramsey.
Speaker, if I could ask a question as you speak about party unity. I think there are some representatives in your caucus and they're in the House that we should be concerned about, especially given the events of this week I'm wondering what you'd have to say to Terry Lynn Weaver, who was apparently at the protest yesterday and called what happened a wonderful and patriotic thing. What would you have to say to a member of your caucus like that?
Well, what I say is she's an American citizen. She's entitled to her First Amendment right, and she has the ability to say whatever she does. People can agree or disagree. What I will tell you, though, is the interesting thing is people want to focus on yesterday, but they don't want to focus back what happened in our state in Nashville back in May and June when you had the riots and the burning and the breaking out windows, trying to say that was peaceful. And somehow on the other side of the aisle from us, we're helping them and going and being part of that process. So I don't think you can say, just call out one member of one side when things were happening on both. But what I will say in both instances, members have the ability, the freedom to express their thoughts, whether you agree or disagree with it.
Yeah, I would argue that there's not an equivalency between protesters attacking private business and protesters trying to interrupt democracy in action. And while maybe there wasn't as strong enough language as you would have appreciated from people on the left over the summer, there certainly wasn't anyone celebrating it as she did yesterday. So that is concerning.
I'm not sure about that. We can agree to disagree. You weren't in the House chamber when we had to throw people who were trying to actually disrupt the House as we were doing our Democrat process. Maybe they weren't trying to jump on the House floor, but they were certainly disrupting the process of what we were trying to do.
Mr. Speaker, just on the tail end of this part of our conversation, one of the things you said on Twitter recently to welcome the new year was a change that was made in Tennessee with the Hall income tax. Can you explain that just before we go to break and the impact on Tennesseans?
It's one of the many taxes that we have eliminated. The gift and inheritance is another. So the Hall income tax was the third. It was a tax on interest and dividends that hurt businesses as well as seniors who are retiring. So it was one of the things that we were hurting us, having people move into our state. And so we're very hopeful and happy that that's no longer an issue because we want to welcome seniors and retirees to Tennessee. We'd rather not them go to Florida. We'd like for them to come to Tennessee.
We're going to take a quick break on Inside Tennessee. Back with the House Speaker right after this. Susan, you'll lead us off.